Good morning, everyone. I'm Judy Maggio with Austin PBS, and we appreciate you sharing a part of your morning with us. This is the virtual version of Leadership Austin's Engage Breakfast. Many of the issues that we've tackled at Engage Breakfast over the years, things like systemic racism, inequities, injustices, are not only front and center right now, they are spilling into our streets. So while today's talk was originally going to be a regional look at the impact of the pandemic, we want to pivot, at least for a portion of this morning's talk, to really what's happening at this watershed moment in our community and in our country. So to start us off, I want to turn to Courtney Bailey. Courtney is the Director of Issues and Engagement for Leadership Austin, and she's going to share a poem by Langston Hughes with a very poignant message for us all. Courtney.
Thank you, Judy. So this poem is entitled, I Look at the World by Langston Hughes. I look at the world from awakening eyes and a Black face, and this is what I see. This fenced off narrow space assigned to me. I look then at the silly walls through dark eyes and a dark face, and this is what I know. That all these walls oppression builds will have to go. I look at my own body with eyes no longer blind, and I see that my own hands can make the world that's in my mind. Then let's us hurry, comrades, the road to find. In this poem, Langston Hughes is calling for people to get up and do something about racial injustice and systemic inequities. This means holding our white counterparts accountable and challenging those in positions of power to do what is right and fair. In the same breath, he's also reminding people of color that we don't have to wait for others to take action. We can create change in both our own community and the larger society. This can mean speaking out against covert racism, which is harder to call out since it sometimes seems to be coming from a well-intentioned place. It also means recognizing how some of us contribute and benefit from whiteness and these oppressive systems. Lastly, it can mean making conscious efforts to be a part of the solution in ways that matter most to you. This is why I've worked with Judy and the panel to craft questions that will hopefully create dialogue about both short-term and long-term solutions for addressing issues impacting our region. Thanks, Judy and panel, for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Courtney, for setting such an important tone for this morning's breakfast and for reminding us all that it really is up to each of us as individuals to take action every single day in our lives to confront racism. So I loved the poem and I loved your remarks, and to tell everyone a reminder that Courtney is your voice today. Courtney will be fielding all of the audience questions, and we hope that you will engage and ask this panel because this is an important moment in our history, and we want everyone to take part and feel like they are empowered to ask community leaders even some tough questions this morning. So thank you, Courtney. And we're going to get started now. We have a lot of ground to cover. We only have an hour. We want to introduce you to our wonderful panel. First of all, we have Sereniah Breland. She is the city manager of Pflugerville, Texas. Then we have Scott Sellers, and Scott is the city manager of Kyle, Texas. And Chris Shorter. Chris is an assistant city manager here in Austin, Texas. So thank you all for giving us some of your morning today to shine the light on some of these issues in your various communities. I want to take a moment at the beginning now to do some personal reflection from each of you. Give us your perspective, not only on this community unrest that we're seeing, but the racial injustices and systemic inequities that are really at the root of what is happening. Chris, I'm going to go ahead and start with you.
All right. Well, let me start just really by thanking Judy, thanking you and Courtney and really the entire team at Leadership Austin for bringing us together. It really just speaks to the strength of our region, of our community, that we have these kinds of forums to share and to talk in this moment in particular. For us to be able to have this dialogue is extremely important. I'll say that this is it's a tough moment, and there are a lot of folks who are grieving right now and who are struggling to cope. And so I'll say personally, I came into this work, into public service, for this exact reason. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, saw very directly as a young person the differences between how some neighborhoods were resourced and how others were resourced. And as a 14 or 15-year-old, I believe I was 15, decided that I wanted to make cities a better place to live. And so the moment that we are in right now, really it hits home for me and for many of the folks that I've grown up with and who've also gone into public service, especially local public service. There's a very big difference when you are working in a city where you see the people you serve every day and you hear from them via email and phone call every day. There's a very big difference than governments at other levels. So I would say that just personally, I have been sharing and talking with friends and family to check on them, to make sure they're okay. This is really a local conversation, but also a national conversation, really global. There are, global conversation happening. And for a lot of people of color, particularly the Black community, African-American community, this is a devastating moment. And so it is, I appreciate that we're starting the conversation off this way.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Scott, give us some perspective from Kyle. You have a very large African-American and Latinx community there. How is your community being impacted, and give us your perspective?
Well, thank you, Judy. And I really appreciate, just like Chris said, this opportunity to express, first of all, our solidarity and support with what's been happening around the country. These are such important issues. And in Kyle, we stand with the rest of America for change. This crisis really brings me back to several in the past that the nation has gone through. I think about Ahmed Mohammed in Irving. We might remember that story. He was otherwise known as Clock Boy. Think about Michael Brown in Ferguson, and and many other instances along with George Floyd in Minneapolis. And in each of those, the reaction was a little bit different. And as I have spoken with community leaders to determine why the reaction has been different and how to shape the outcome, I've realized that a crisis like these mentioned tests relationships that are previously established for good or for bad. Irving is a great example. They had done a very good job to develop a relationship with their local mosque or imam in communities of different demographics. And when that crisis occurred, it was the communities of faith that actually came together to demonstrate their support for local government and for the unification of the community. And so that crisis came and went very quickly, and it actually turned out to be somewhat positive. You see other communities where that relationship was tested and maybe it wasn't developed in such a strong way. Here in Kyle, we have a very strong relationship with our community of faith, as well as our different Latinx or African-American communities. And we have had already prayer meetings with them. We have had prayer rallies. And so again, they have come to the aid of the community, and together we are supporting and praying for the nation. And I think that's really been helpful. It's constant communication and trust.
And now I'm going to turn to you, Serena, and let's hear how Pflugerville is handling this moment in time and some of your perspectives and observations from Pflugerville.
Sure. Thank you. I echo Chris in saying thank you for the opportunity. I want to speak a little bit from the heart about, the way we see it as leaders, maybe not specific to Pflugerville yet, but you know, as I stay up at night and think about this topic of racial injustice, you know, I have a desperate yearning to understand and respond. But I feel like I'm often feel paralyzed by my privilege that I recognize and my position as a public servant that isn't elected. As I identify as a white female that grew up in the suburbs, I catch myself casting my own doubts. Do I have too much privilege to speak up? Will my words come out wrong? To be misunderstood? Will my own bias misrepresent what's truly in my heart? Have I had it so easy that I don't have a voice? Fortunately, that same privilege affords me the opportunity to recommend policy, to engage with the public, to provide platforms of meaningful conversations past the cameras and past social media. I think that no better time than now, we have that opportunity to foster a community that not just allows people to speak, but that we celebrate hearing each other and allowing people like me to have mistakes, allowing us all to learn and grow. And I hope that we all both learn to extend grace for providing a judgment-free platform to be heard. I believe every organization should develop systemic racism and oppression countermeasures and explicitly include them in strategic planning work as the three of us lead organizations. You know, what way is there to measure the absenteeism of people of color, of our employees, because the day they took off was largely directly or indirectly the result of racism? How many of us took a mental health day in the past week? Or for those of us that didn't, we probably should have. This international spotlight on injustice is the result, not just from what I call systemic failure, but truly systemic atrocities, years of blatant discrimination, as Scott mentions, against underrepresented groups. I do believe that our world is stronger when we engage with each other and we lift each other up. But I think now there's no easy reset button. Educational and economic opportunities are not distributed equally or even equitably. Therefore, we as leaders must actively compensate and take steps to do so. I'm proud of my city council in Pflugerville for taking such steps. They've created a diversity commission in the last month. We'll be firming that up as a way of saying that the status quo is no longer good enough. I know that many of us have gone through a lot of emotions over the past week, especially. I urge us always to reach out, support each other, use our positions to boost, to energize, and not back down regardless of who we may offend. I do believe that, again, as leaders in our communities, we at minimum must demand to have policies and procedures and training in place to protect and serve our communities equitably and to eradicate all discrimination. Thank you for the opportunity for me to share.
Wonderful perspective from each of you, and your individual cities have such unique flavors and populations, and it's very interesting to hear how you're handling and how the impact has been made on your communities. Chris, I want to start with you. You know, Austin has this long history of racial divides and inequities. You know, over the weekend, though, the conversations that started obviously during this pandemic about how communities of color have been hit in profound ways, in disparate ways. It took a different meaning, though. So how have these community protests and the backlash that you've seen that really started this weekend, has that changed what the city manager's office's strategy is for planning? And if you have like a specific incident you could talk about, that would be great.
No, I really appreciate that question, and certainly reflect and have been, in addition to receiving the sort of updates from our emergency operations center, who is stood up and really working to respond to COVID-19, that we are also receiving regular updates when demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations, are happening around the city. And just like everyone else in the community and in the region, have been watching the news and sort of certainly watching how our community is standing up and peacefully demonstrating. You know, what I will say is, for those who are listening in and watching, that the city manager's office in the city of Austin is organized around a number of assistant city managers. And so I'm covering and supporting issues around health, environment, culture, and lifelong learning. There's also an assistant city manager for public safety, an assistant city manager for mobility, our deputy city manager responsible for much of the administrative and good government work that's being done in the city of Austin. And I am and an assistant city manager for economic opportunity. And so I say that to say we have all really coalesced around supporting and making sure that as a city, we are doing everything we can to support our workforce. And so just like the community, our workforce is affected significantly by what we are seeing on the news really every day. And if you are watching the 24-hour news cycle, you're seeing it minute by minute. And there is a mental and emotional impact. And so we are, as a government, as an organization, really focused on making sure that our workforce, that our community, that they have the resources that they need to cope, because really this is that as well, coping. In terms of a direct response for this weekend, our public officials, fortunately, we are in a city of very progressive elected officials who have mostly all made state and public statements expressing some concern where concern is warranted, and also acknowledging where officers have shown great restraint. And so the city council has called for a special meeting tomorrow at 3 p.m. specifically to discuss the tactics that were used this weekend by our police department. And so Chief Manley, who has also made very public statements about this weekend and some of the tragic incidents that occurred. And so we, just like we do in the city of Austin, we are going to have a very public conversation, and one that our residents and community can participate in and react to. And so I know we're going to talk more, and I certainly have more to say in terms of direct response. There are a number of things that we're also doing in particular strategically for our workforce. We have really leaned in as a city in investing in undoing racism and unconscious bias training for our workforce. I personally attended that training earlier this year, and will say that it even opened my eyes, and I've lived it, as a young person, and certainly as an adult and professional. And so attending that training was eye-opening for me. And so we have, as a city, really leaned into making sure that training is available and supported in terms of investment by our organization. So I'll stop there, fully understanding that we'll come back to this topic.
I know Leadership Austin has been a big proponent and helped spread those Beyond Diversity trainings. I went through it myself, and I have to say, especially as a privileged white person, it was extremely life-changing.
Yes.
Thank you, Chris. I want to check in with Courtney and see if we have some audience questions before we get to some individual questions for Scott and Serena. Courtney?
Thanks, Judy. We do have a question from Adrian Logan. How is each leader staying connected with your peers, and what are you learning from other communities that may have a leg up on addressing institutional racism and systemic inequities?
Who wants to start with that one? Learning from your peers, sharing information.
I'll start, and this is to some extent a response to the question in relation to how we are coordinating with other big cities regarding our response to COVID-19, as well as some of the work we're doing in terms of the response to some of the racial unrest and the demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations that are occurring. There is a big city managers call that is coordinated, and many of the city managers with populations, I believe, of over 500,000 or somewhere around that number are learning from each other and making sure that we're using the best practices possible. I will say in the city of Austin, we are actually getting calls from other cities to learn about what we're doing in the strategies that we are undertaking, especially as it relates to issues of serving vulnerable populations. So we stay connected because as a profession, city managers, assistant city managers, really this profession in general, we have a very unique role to play. And so it benefits us to stay coordinated and to stay in touch. And we do that in multiple ways.
Good to know you all are sharing information because we can all learn from each other right now in so many different ways. Scott, I have a question for you. Kyle, as we mentioned, is home to a very large population of Hispanic and Latinx populations there. I'm wondering, this community has experienced an incredibly high proportion of the COVID-19 cases. In Austin, we have 76% of the people hospitalized are in the Latinx community. This is a huge issue. So what are you doing in Kyle to protect the well-being of the Latinx community there?
Well, thanks for that question, because it really became apparent as we began opening things up that we had this demographic that was disproportionately impacted. And we created a task force internally as soon as we realized this to address the issue. Now in Kyle, we're a little smaller than Austin, not much, but we're 53,000 population roughly. And so our ability to target and reach the entirety of the population is probably a little easier. Our demographic on the city council is actually majority Latinx as well. And I would say as an overall community demographic, we're about 55% Latinx. So there's definitely a good mix here in Kyle. But as you mentioned, yeah, the statistics were disproportionately affecting our Latinx population. And so with this task force, we realized that even though we were doing a good job on our end with our website and social media of getting things translated, we realized that not a lot of the community was plugged in to our messaging. And we knew we needed to get out to the community. So first of all, we reached out to a local Latinx family that is fairly prominent here in the community. We took pictures of them and we took those photos and started putting it on posters, on rack cards with very succinct messages in Spanish. And then we would distribute those directly to the areas where we knew that it would be seen the most. So we would go to our gas stations. We would target certain areas of the community with the large Hispanic Latino population. We would go to churches and distribute information there. We have electronic billboards through the city on I-35, and we targeted those billboards in Spanish and with that family on it. We just this last weekend had a large mass food giveaway event in partnership with the food bank, and distributed a little poster or a little flyer in each one of those bags that were given out to the community. And we are starting to see that the awareness is coming around, and we're seeing the numbers starting to flatten out a little bit. So we know that our work, while it's not over, it's having an impact. Our city council members that have good contacts through social media with that community have been targeting messages as well. So again, it was just realizing that the overall demographic of the community wasn't being plugged in. We needed to go to them, and I think we've done that in a pretty significant way.
This is probably a question that all of you can answer, but I want to ask this question to Serena. All communities have had to really pivot activities, priorities, externally and internally since this pandemic started. pull back the curtain for us and share some of the changes that you all have had to make there in Pflugerville very quickly.
You nailed it. I think all communities have become the master of pivoting. You know, one thing we early recognized was that the number of books in a home is typically indicative of child literacy rates. So we partnered with the school district to get books in the food pickup line. We recognized that people needed to get online and apply for jobs for or apply for unemployment. So we expanded Wi-Fi to our parking lots. All those were quickly done. We recognized that our employees needed mental health tips, so we engaged them with professionals online to have those conversations. We recognized that our employees were experiencing a great deal of stress. So we did make this fun channel on our Slack messaging system, and it was where you could do dumb jokes or cat videos or whatever it is that made you laugh. We recognized the need for that layperson equity commission, so we did that. We recognized that people needed information and access to healthcare. So Councilmember Rudy Mateo invited Central Health to come speak at our council meeting, and then we shared all of that in English and Spanish on our social media. We recognized that we could reach even more people of different abilities, so we added closed captioning on our YouTube videos. My HR department is called People Plus Culture. That's kind of our thing. And we put together a reopened task force to allow some leadership opportunities for our employees to create policy and look at what this next phase looks like. We recognized our need to evaluate individuals of different abilities. So we established an ADA task force to update our ADA compliance functions. A little bit of disruption in construction at the beginning was challenging. It was really considering a balance of economic viability and public health, but ultimately we continued on construction. I'm happy to report my employees have remained healthy and engaged in their work, whether they be in the field or working from home. But I think dealing with the dichotomy of the number one objective for us was to keep our people safe, all while how do you carry out those much needed city services that our residents depend upon, was a constant conversation every day of how do you do that. But all in all, Pflugerville has shown me to be a team of mastering the pivot in bizarre times. So it's been neat. And I think what will be really neat is which of those virtual programs and virtual ways of doing business will actually stay. And I think that's going to be an interesting conversation for all organizations.
Yeah, and that leads me to what I want Chris and Scott to chime in on. What are some things that you all have put in place due to the pandemic that you're learning from and that you think will be part of your long-term strategy moving forward? Because we are looking for silver linings and lessons. Chris and Scott, do you want to talk to that?
Sure, I'll jump in and let Chris carry it home. So one of the key things that occurred to greatly facilitate our ability to respond during coronavirus is the legislature relaxed the ability that we had to run meetings, and we were able to rely much more heavily on our technologies that we've been implementing for years to allow us to meet virtually. And I think, of course, the rest of the world, we've all gotten to know Zoom very well, or Ring Central or another video platform, trying to translate that into public meetings where we still have to be very open and transparent, involving the citizens, involving others. And we have manipulated our technology in such a way that we've learned that we've actually created additional opportunities for the public to engage. Whereas before we would have physical meetings where the public would need to find rides and come in to the council chambers. Now they can click on a link or pick up the phone and engage in a way that they've never been able to do so in the past. So I would hope that our additional reliance, just like the private sector has said, we're going to telecommute more, we're going to rely on technology more. I would hope that we have that ability to continue to innovate with technology and continue that approach to work more efficiently and effectively.
Chris, the complaint over the years in most communities, but especially Austin, is that you know, people don't have access to council meetings because they can't take off work and come down and listen and testify. So has this helped, do you think, engage more people in the processes and procedures at City Hall? And are you hearing more voices because people can join in virtually?
I smiled a bit when Scott started with technology, because that is absolutely right. I think there's a perception certainly that government is not agile, and that we can adopt, if you will, these sort of new methods of doing work. And within really about a week at the start of this pandemic, week and a half, we were able to really move quickly to a mostly virtual way of interacting and engaging and holding meetings. I found myself for full days, 9, 10, 12 hours a day, sitting in front of the computer, doing meetings, certainly at the start of the pandemic. The answer to your question is yes. I think that our community is beginning to really move toward assessing, or I should say, really appreciating being able to access council meetings in this way. I don't want to leave out, though, the segment of our population that may not have a computer at home or access to this kind of technology. So, we'll have to continue to innovate around how we engage all of our community, and not just the community that has the ability to sort of be at home with a computer or a laptop and be able to kind of access us. I'd also say that language access for our community that may not speak English as a first language, that these are also very important components of this transition. And if we're going to make this sustainable and make this a normal part of our business, especially or governing, especially if we are in this for another wave or for another few months, that we will have to make sure that we can engage all parts of our community. So I really, again, appreciate Scott sort of starting off with technology, and Judy, you continuing with it, because that's probably one of the biggest changes we've seen in terms of our response to the pandemic.
Serena, I'm going to have you chime in on that before we go to an audience question. I'm sure that you've also seen this digital divide and the inability for people to come participate in government prior to the pandemic. Have you seen increased engagement, and how are you guys addressing this digital divide?
I think just like Scott and Chris were saying, public meetings online have I think worked out for us pretty well. My numbers when I look online look similar to what I have inside. I will take the opportunity though. I often talk to my staff about no past our single story, no past what our story is, and there's other stories out there. And at the beginning of COVID, I heard some of my staff make comments like, oh, well, people can just buy that online. And I realized quickly, and I used it hopefully as a coaching moment to say, that's not really true. Some of my very own employees don't have checking accounts. I don't know what that looks like in my story. My story has allowed me to always have a checking account and a credit card, but that's not true for everyone. And I need to realize that whenever the stores close and people didn't have access, or they don't have the time or the childcare to stand in line or do whatever it is, whatever those barriers are, I believe we as community leaders have to get past our single story and take a look at what exactly Chris made the comment of that not everybody has access to that internet. And for us to blindly go in and think that they do, I think is not the way we should lead. And so how do we use technology? I think internally we've got that down, but our openness and transparency to the public is paramount. As whenever I even think about what we're going through, at the root of it is the lack of trust. And whenever I think about trust, I've got to be able to say, how do we reach everyone by which they garner and extend and receive trust with their own local government? And so it's got to even be beyond technology. We've got to nail that at the very basis, and then figure out how do we reach those that don't have access.
Courtney, I know the audience is weighing in with some questions now. What do you have for us?
Yes, I do have some questions. One second. So Rona Walton made a comment about mental health and trauma, and so I want to elaborate on that. So community trauma is trauma that happens in large groups of individuals and can be transmitted across generations and communities. And it has it's connected to historic and ongoing root causes of social inequities. And so how can our regional offices collaborate to support and invest in the process of healing and recovery, especially as it relates to mental health and wellness resources and communities that don't have access to that?
Wonderful question. Chris, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Yeah, it is a great question, and it's so relevant right now. I will say that seeing these clips of African Americans, being violently thrown about or killed has certainly caused me pause when I would so freely sort of check social media and just or look at the news. Now I sort of am very hesitant in some cases, especially right now, because it is so difficult at this point to see these videos. And I think the caller is absolutely right to suggest that there is there's a sort of trauma that is occurring within our community right now, and this reality is not new for some within our community. That there is a reckoning, if you will, that's happening for those who may not have experienced or may not have lived this experience, but for others, this is life as we know it. That said, as a workforce, we really encourage our employees to take advantage of our employee assistance program. We have sent our city manager, Spencer Crunk, has sent out just this morning a message to encourage employees who may be struggling right now to take advantage of the employee assistance program. I've personally had sessions and talks with employee groups to just really listen more than anything else, and to hear some of the stories, the tragic stories really, from some of our employees. And so as a community, I would say that we have work to do in terms of making sure that mental health resources are available for all segments of our community, but certainly recognize the need. We just have work to do with our partners, with our healthcare providers, to make sure that that is available, especially to those who are maybe uninsured or who might have challenges getting to and from. So again, I really appreciate that question, and I think it's such an important question in this moment, because we are really as a nation, as a region, as a city, struggling through a very difficult moment right now.
Does anybody else want to weigh in on the mental health challenges of all of these communities, and in particular, people who might not have access to counseling? Now, I know here in Austin, Integral Care, NAMI, several groups have really stepped up to offer this at a reduced rate or for free. But what's happening in Pflugerville and Kyle when it comes to mental health help?
Sure, I'll jump in. It's such an important question because it's a recurring question that is quickly brushed under the rug. We'll have an event like we're going through now. The question will surface, we'll talk about it, and then things will go back to normal. And I feel like over the years, Chris mentioned resources. That has been the absolute most difficult part of addressing real mental health needs. The local government really doesn't get resources like we should from external sources, state and federal government, and we are largely left on our own to create response. Matter of fact, here in Texas, that mental health aspect of governance has been given to the counties, And so our local cities, if we are to address it, we are really left without the resources to address it. The counties will try to take that away, or the state will try to take that away. So we work with our local healthcare providers, our hospitals. We'll work with our public safety to do routine checks on those who we know are struggling with mental health. But the question always comes back to resources. What more can we do? How can we get more medication, more counseling, more assistance to these individuals that are truly struggling? And it's a question that I would love to see not be swept under the rug. It's one that I think we need to keep at the forefront moving forward with the state, and figure out how do we get additional resources to where they're most needed.
Okay, I want to ask a question to all of you now. How do you envision regional collaboration right now? One of the reasons we wanted to talk to both you and Scott and Serena is because we all wonder how, as different areas of Central Texas grow and expand and change, how do you all collaborate and work together, or do you, especially during this time of unrest and dealing with a pandemic? So give us a glimpse of that collaboration, if you would. Serena, why don't you go ahead and start with that one?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about regional resilience. I know that through our professional organization with TCMA, we have the ability to communicate widely with other city managers. But when I think about us as a region, I'll start by saying I think half of us, in the world right now recognize the problem. We don't know those next steps, or we're worried about leaving our comfort zone. It's easier to operate with the same set of stakeholders and the same set of circle of influences that we always have. I think this is a step-by-step, and more specifically as a region, I think we need to lose the blinders thinking that if we do these 5 great things in our community, we're safe and secure and we're doing it right. But I think that's false. What does it matter if one city in our region is excellent or the best to live in by some magazine rating, if the next city over isn't making any gains? I don't think you can have regional resilience without working off of a similar scorecard and sharing assets and innovations. And when I really think about it, when's the last time we saw something really authentic and really bold in our region? These race conversations are the most authentic government integration that I've seen in a very long time, and probably in my career, piecemeal as they are. I think that we have to share scorecards, and we have to take a look at lifting other cities up, regardless of where we are.
Scott, you want to take a turn on regional collaboration and resiliency, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Serena mentioned scorecard, kind of the direction I thought made sense for us as well. In this conversation is so good because it's authentic. This is honest dialogue, and as I look back over the last 2 to 3 months of response to COVID-19, as I look back to the last week in response to the protests, there's a gap. I would love to say that we just immediately will gravitate toward each other in this regional collaboration, but it seems like every instance hits so hard and is so profound that we spend so much time trying to figure out our own response that the regional aspect sometimes comes after the fact in an after action report or a report card. I know the organization that we all belong to, which is called ICMA, International City Manager Association, has worked very hard for years to try to get us to be proactive in our thinking, proactive in our regionalism. And we do have meetings every other month with city managers. We talk about these issues. But again, when the crisis hits, it seems like we kind of shrink in, and sometimes data is hard to get. I know locally we've had a hard time getting data from our epidemiologists. We've had a hard time getting data from other communities. It's slow rolling. I would love to see out of this event moving forward a broader response of data sharing. So how do we in real time add our data, what we're seeing locally, and also receive data from the state and our surrounding communities. So some sort of a regional dashboard or larger would definitely help in our response and help us stay more collaborative.
Chris, you're the big dog in this fight. I mean, Austin is such a centerpiece of this region. How are we collaborating with the smaller communities and sharing and looking at resiliency?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and certainly appreciate Scott's sort of observations. I will say, when we were in the eye of the storm in terms of the initial reaction and response to COVID-19, that Scott is right, that the city of Austin and Travis County, really, our officials were on the phone daily, talking about response, planning for health orders to be issued, really talking through some of the challenges that we faced. And when the need arose, we would broaden the conversation to other counties and other jurisdictions. But it was not an automatic or built-in structural way that we engaged or organized. And I think there's certainly a call and a need for that. When you look around the country at sort of regional powerhouses, if you will. I don't want to call any out because I feel like Central Texas is one of them. But there are certainly other places in the country that where cities in the surrounding suburban communities are really partnered together on issues around transportation planning, economic development, and others that really springboards that community into a world-class place. And so we have to, as a community, do better. And I believe that we certainly have public officials, elected officials, who are interested and willing. And so I'm certainly optimistic about that. And specific to COVID-19, we cannot fight this virus alone. We cannot fight this virus unless we do it as a region, because how one county, how one jurisdiction is impacted will certainly eventually impact others. This is a virus that is spread through community. And so we need to keep that in mind, and we certainly do in much of the planning. We just need to make it practice. And so again, appreciate sort of Scott's honesty in terms of some of the gaps there, but I'm certainly optimistic given what I've seen in my kind of newness to the region, and so certainly think that we are kind of ready to work together as a community around, especially around these emergency declarations and response.
Indeed, we all are in this together. We have time for one more audience question. So I want to turn to Courtney and see what people are curious about. Courtney?
Okay, 1 second. So we have a question from Sumaya Malik. She would like to know whether any of you will participate in the emergency hearing taking place in Austin tomorrow. This hearing is set to address concerns about officers' response to protests. If so, what is your role? If not, how does your office plan to bring this conversation and timely action steps to your community?
Chris, I think that one's for you.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. That's actually at the top of the hour. That was the special called council meeting that I referred to. Our city council members, many of them have already made very public statements, if you will, about wanting to ask questions about the tactics used over the weekend by our police department. Chief Manley, again, has made public statements and made a commitment to be there to provide comments and then answer questions from the community and from our council members tomorrow. I will certainly be there participating virtually. As I also mentioned at the top of the hour, as an assistant city manager for health, environment, culture, and lifelong learning, Our Austin Police Department is not a direct report to me, but certainly as an executive within this organization, I certainly share and take responsibility with my colleague to make sure that we are listening to community, that we are present, and that we are prepared to make the necessary changes, cultural changes within our police department as we move forward that properly reflect where we are as a city and where we are as a region.
Chris, if someone wants to make sure they watch tomorrow, watch this meeting, what time and how do people access that?
Sure. So I think it's ATXN is the network, and there's also, for those watching on television who may not have access online, you could access it on I believe it's channel 6 is the government access channel. And if you cannot call in online, you could call in using your own phone. And we also have language access opportunities, if you will. So if you are calling in and you will need some support, we do have on the calls some support in making sure that we are properly translating questions and comments from the community. So the special call meeting starts at 3 p.m. It is separate from our 10 a.m. regular council meeting. So tomorrow, our council meeting will start at 10 a.m. as normal with community comment. And at 3 p.m., we will start our special call meeting specifically to talk about our response to the demonstrations over the weekend. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. That's important community information for people to know, to engage and access that information and also ask questions. So thank you very much. It's time for our call to action. And this is always the most important part of every engaged breakfast, but I think it's more important now than ever. What do each of you want people in the audience, and especially those watching from your individual regions and communities, how can we act upon and build community resilience? And I am going to start with you, Serena.
Thank you for that opportunity. We need to commit to being leaders in the healing process as we work to correct injustice and inequities. We need to commit to be champions and facilitators of constructive dialogue that unites rather than divides. It is our job not only to hope for a brighter future, but to intentionally work towards it. We must listen and learn. We must put the eradication of discrimination at the top of our list. We must create change, and we must support all people of color within our region.
Scott, what is your call to action today for the people watching?
Boy, that is such a great call. I could just say ditto to what Serena said. It does. It starts with each one of us, and I think that's clearly. Sometimes we think we don't have a voice with so many larger personalities, larger institutions, larger governments making decisions for us. But as we've seen over the last week, as we've seen over the last couple of months, we all have the ability individually to prevent coronavirus or stop the spread. We all have the ability individually to stand up and make a difference for justice, for truth, for right, for this regionalism. So let's not let the dialogue stop. Let's not let our own voices be heard, but let's each stand up for what we believe in, for change, for a better world. And honestly, the obligation is on our shoulders. See something, say something, be a part of the response and solution.
Part of the solution, indeed. Chris,
I'll start how I started at the top of the hour. That as public officials, as non-elected public servants, we have made a decision to come into this work. to help. And one of the lessons I learned early on as a professional is that to do this work properly, you have to bring community with you. And so for those who watch and have watched some of these clips and videos and have been heartbroken, what I'll say is that this is not just an African-American problem, that this isn't just a people of color problem, that we really want to make sure that in every neighborhood, in every community, as this conversation happens, that folks really feel and understand that they make a difference. And no matter what your title is or what you do for a living, you are a leader and can be, even if you're in your own backyard and you all are your family and friends, or you're having a conversation and someone says something that you don't understand or don't agree with, that's an opportunity for leadership. And that's where this conversation really takes on a really important life, where it's happening among friends and among family. We also, and I would say strongly, that we really want to encourage the community to continue to advocate for and push our government to do and be the government that we need for it to be. It's such an important component. I learned early on coming here to the city of Austin that we have a very active city, very active community, and very active residents who want to be a part of the governing process. And I think that is a very important asset here in Austin, and especially in this conversation, a conversation where we're talking about how the police engage within our communities. It is extremely important that the community has a role in that conversation. And so I'll say that in terms of what you can do, you can continue to be active and continue to be involved and continue to be a part of the conversation, both within your community and within our city's forums to receive those types of communications. And I'll also say personally, to stay hopeful, that I am really optimistic, and I have to be as a leader, optimistic about our future, that I'm not alone in saying that this is a tough moment for us, but that we have to we have to encourage our family, and we have to encourage our friends. For those who have seen these videos and know firsthand what it means to be intimidated by or anxious when you see a police officer, that we want to make sure that we stay encouraged during this time, and that you make a phone call to check on your neighbor, to check on your friend, to check on your family member. Not just for what's happening in terms of this racial conversation around policing, but also in terms of COVID-19. We have spent a lot of time over the last 2 months, and some of us being isolated from coworkers and from neighbors and from family. So check on your neighbor, check on your family, check on your friends. And I'll stop there. I know I've gone on, but really, really appreciate that we are wrapping the conversation up in this way and with that question.
Well, we appreciate all three of you. I think that more of these types of dialogues are needed in our region more than ever. We are all facing an unprecedented time. It indeed is a watershed moment in our community and our country. And you all have provided such great perspective today. I know that you can't see anyone out there, but there are a lot of people watching, and I will give you a collective round of applause and a heartfelt thank you to Chris Shorter with the City of Austin, Scott Sellers with Kyle, Texas, and Serena Breland, the City Manager of Pflugerville, for setting an important tone, and for all that you do in your own communities to engage and empower. Public servants are so important to all of us right now. So we really appreciate all three of you. Thank you for giving us your thoughts this morning. Thank you to Leadership Austin for hosting these important engagement discussions on a monthly basis. And thank you for all that you do to encourage beyond diversity training and civic engagement. And we want to remind anyone who is watching that if you are interested in becoming a more involved citizen, a great way is through going through some of the Leadership Austin programs. You can find information on their website about that. This is our final Engaged Breakfast for the season. We won't be back until the fall. I think we've covered some very key community issues and hopefully amplified diverse, vital voices. So thank you all for watching today. Stay involved. Stay vigilant. Stay engaged. Make it a good day out there. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Judy.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. A great breakfast.